The world today is very different from the world I grew up in. I used to think the world was pretty much the street where I lived. I used to think there were only 3 bands and 1 singer in the whole world. Duran Duran, Wham, Versa Forte, and Michael Jackson. I used to pray to God that someone would discover Michael Jackson was my uncle. The rumor would spread and Michael would come all the way from America to visit me, Hrund, his little niece from Iceland who adored him. We would walk the street I lived in as we'd catch up and bond. You have to give me some credit. This was the time of vinyl records and cassettes. There were no computers. We had no TV in July and no TV on Thursdays. Years pass. I've grown up. I've traveled the world, got my degrees, and I'm settling into a permanent position at the United Nations. The world is my oyster. And then it collapses. Boom. I hit a wall.
Look at you, look around us. People unhappy. We are totally disconnected with the brain and the body. It's so many people live in their heads and they don't live with emotions. So something must be deeply wrong.
It takes a lot to know a man. It takes a lot to understand. The warrior, the sage, the little boy enraged. It takes a lot to know a woman, a lot to understand what's humming. The honeybee, the sting, the little girl with wings. It takes a lot to give, to ask for help, to be yourself, to know and love what you live with. It takes a lot to breathe.
I was 27 when I moved to Kosovo to work on women's rights with the United Nations, in rebuilding a country that had gone through horrible atrocities. I gave it everything I had. But my problem was, I didn't know my limitations. I didn't know how to deal with the trauma and sorrow that surrounded me. I shut these emotions out and kept pressuring myself to do better. If you'd said to me at the time that I lived only in my head and not with my emotions, I wouldn't have known what you were talking about. And to be honest, I wouldn't have listened. It reached a state where I got so disconnected from myself that I was forced to think again. While traveling from Kosovo to Kazakhstan, I felt this terrible pain and started to bleed. I didn't think much of it, just took painkillers and went on with work. I'd had a miscarriage, and I didn't even realize it at the time. This should have been a wake-up call. But I kept pushing myself at work. Soon after, I was in the unique position of having a guaranteed job at the UN for life. My dream had come true. I should have felt on top of the world. But I didn't. I felt more like a zombie, an outsider in my own life. Having worked closely with people who had suffered war, I felt the UN system had become too administrative and disconnected from the people it was meant to empower. The world is changing so fast, and we are stuck in our old ways of doing things. At work, I would daydream about how I would do things differently when I retired. But I was only 29. Like so many people today, I ended up having a burnout. I felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. I resigned from my job, feeling terrified of what would happen next. But what happened next wasn't so bad. I teamed up with my good friend Christine, a filmmaker who had just finished a project exploring children's ability to cope in today's world. We started our journey with an important question. Do we live in our heads and not with emotions? And if so, how is it affecting our lives? At the Temple of Modern Knowledge, Harvard University, we started searching for answers.
You know, we're complex beings. We're mind, body, spirit. And when the pressure's on, we tend to just focus on the rational mind. We shut ourselves down. If we can't see inside ourselves, we can't use our greatest capabilities, and we'll never let our own intuition flow. I find that at the highest level, all decisions are intuitive. Look, if they weren't, we could just run them off on computers. We'd have all the answers. In the last 20 to 25 years of my life, we've seen the dominance of rational thought. And it's dominated a lot of our academic institutions, it's dominated the media, and it's taken away from the capacity to really advance the intuitive skills. But I think we're now, for the first time, we're starting to realize the problems are not getting any better. We have to step back and take a whole new approach to these problems. One of the challenges we've had recently in business is by going to this fully rational side and by focusing everything on the near-term measurement, analytical tools, we have ground out or expunged creativity from our companies. Tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars are being wasted. We think by more work, we get more work done. This is simply not true. I have students here at Harvard that just say, oh, I worked for 100 hours a week. Look, you cannot sustain that. You get lost in the numbers, you get lost in logic. You don't give yourself a chance to pull back. I
thought working 100 hours a week was a virtue. I had to burn out before I questioned that. When Bill says we need to let our intuition flow, I have to admit I get a bit nervous. Because through my academic studies, I'd been trained not to rely on my intuition. I meet another professor who combines economics with psychology to get a better understanding about how we make decisions based on intuition. Is intuition reliable?
So one way to define reliability might be to say how accurate is my intuition in guiding my judgments or my decisions. And there I would have to say it is not very reliable. When I see you, my first instinct or my intuition might be to judge you by what I see. And, you know, if you are a woman, then some stereotypes that I have about women might come into mind. So seeing really is believing. And seeing affects our intuition. So if I do not see women in leadership positions, I don't think women can be leaders. If I do not see men as kindergarten teachers or nurses, I don't think men can do a good job in that.
So our own biases can be dangerous when we take decisions or judge other people. But isn't intuition something more than that? I read a book that says human beings are stuck in logic and left-brain thinking. We meet the man who wrote it. So what are the dangers of having a culture dominated by the left hemisphere? And how is it in real life shaping Western culture?
Well, I think that we can possibly recognize some of what I would see as aspects of the left hemisphere's world in the world around us now. Our world seems like a heap of fragments that it's hard to see how they cohere. And the sort of understanding that used to enable us to see what things mean has been lost, so that wisdom has been replaced by knowledge, and knowledge has been replaced by information, pieces of data, chunks of data. For evolutionary reasons, we have had to be able to attend to the world in two different ways. We need to be able to relate to the world at large, at the same time as manipulating it. And we need both of these approaches to the world, the narrow-focused one and the broad, open, sustained, vigilant one. And these are the differences, basically, between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Now, the trouble is that over time, I think that what has happened is that this narrowly focused attention, which actually doesn't see the whole picture, has begun to take over, and we have begun to believe it is the only way to look at the world. It's actually easier to rehabilitate somebody after a left hemisphere stroke than it is after a right hemisphere stroke. On any medical ward where somebody's been admitted with a stroke in their right hemisphere, you go to see them and say, how are you feeling this morning? Any problems moving your left arm? No? Well, would you mind moving it for me? And they go, I didn't see anything move. You put it right in front of their face. And they go, what, that? That doesn't belong to me. That belongs to the bloke in the next bed. Having a problem with their right hemisphere, functioning only on their left hemisphere, they're not aware of their own deficits. If somebody has a stroke on the left side so that their right hemisphere is still operative, they're devastated by their losses.